Psychic Politics, an Aspect Psychology book by Jane Roberts. Read by Martin John. Continuation Part 3, Final Chapter, Chapter 27. Quote, "Come to the mountain," end quote, and Seth on the safe universe. A young man, a college student, just phoned. He said that he wanted to come and see me, to, quote, "come to the mountain, so to speak," end quote. Dear God, if you'll forgive the term, I'm reminded of a poem I wrote in high school, "A frog sat still and stared with awe at a watch that lay in the sand. Now," he said, "I'm quite sure there is such a thing as man. Our priests," he mused, "have spoken of man who made our pond. Perhaps he left this as a token between us, to be a bond." So the frog spent all his life trying to understand, and while he grew old and tired, the watch ticked on in the sand. Some frogs jeered at him, others called him great, but he only smiled and went off by himself, poor lonely frog, to meditate. End poem. Ignoring the rather miraculous ever-ticking watch, the poem wasn't too bad for a 16-year-old. Now I think that the frog would have done better by contemplating his frogness instead. But if that's how I saw myself back then it's probably connected with the kind of person I've grown to be. Only I'm happier than the frog and not all that lonely. But the young man's phone call brought to the surface of my mind some thoughts I'd been playing around with a few minutes before. Maybe some of us are so appalled by man's condition, so aware of our vulnerability and ignorance, so conscious of the plights in which our fellow beings find themselves, that in desperation we begin, perhaps in childhood, to tell stories to ourselves and others. We tell brave tales of immortality and parades of the gods, galloping crescendos, those stories in which the lost is always found, the sick cured, and all wrongs righted. These are our own creations, spun from the yearnings and questions of the heart, magically set against the terrors and uncertainties of life. Our own compensating yet daring compositions to comfort ourselves and others, yet also reproaching the universe. If we were doing things, it would all be different. Perhaps the animals have their own versions of these tales, but most likely they don't need them. They accept the conditions of their lives. Don't they? Don't they? Or does a mother wolf growl in agony at the far moon, at the death of a cub, and pause with the question, why? Probably not. I take it for granted, at least, that in that respect the animals know better, they feel their part in life and death alike. But even if I'm wrong, they're still spared our kind of questions. They seem to escape our need to set things right. Anyhow, some of us learn to tell these stories and see magic visions springing up to transform the world. After a while, we believe them, at least in part, and others, listening, come to be healed, to find the answers, to see the frog's watch. But the frog can't tell what the watch is for or read the features of its face. And we can't see the real nature of our stories, They dazzle, mystify, and remain undecipherable. Their origin is undecipherable. For where does the yearning come from that we seek to assuage? If there is no immortality of a sorts, no peace, then where did the yearning for these originate? In what mold are the stories unknowingly fitted? Now and then one of us sees, or we make the stories work. We find ourselves somehow suddenly transported to another level of being where, presto, yes, the sick are cured, the lonely comforted, and all things are made right. But when we return with our miraculous message, the miracle doesn't work at home. Bewildered, we lick our wounds, swear off. Then comes another moment of the soul, when we see how easily and clearly it all works, only to find our miracles turned once again into fairy tales told by the fireside. The young man wants to visit the mountain. Don't we all? So I wonder, do our yearnings actually strain our creaturehood to the limit? Do they propel us momentarily into those other levels of consciousness? A kind of consciousness that exists because we have forged it, each of us, bit by bit through the ages? Only we haven't transferred our living there yet? Maybe what we have is all we can really expect of ourselves. Maybe one species of animal, us, gave up all its security of instinct, its known place in the fabric of things, to forge a new kind of consciousness. Maybe, just maybe, no other species, at least in our frame of reference, had to bear the brunt of consciousness, going it alone, so to speak, traveling outside the known rules of heritage and instinct. Maybe we took a horrible plunge and fantastic leap or ascension. Maybe we took a horrible plunge and fantastic leap or ascension all at once, giving up old ordered ways by breaking loose, straying, daring to remember and anticipate ourselves. As it's said, at least, the mammals, or mammals to be, crawled up on the land from the ocean. So maybe now we're doing the same thing in a different way, climbing out of time with its limited beliefs of cause and effect. After learning to acclimate ourselves to our physical environment, after struggling even to subdue it and make it ours, maybe we're learning that on certain levels, at least, we've been manipulating mirages. Maybe we're learning that the real world is always inside, where the mirages are made. Perhaps we're getting ready to explore those inner landscapes and learning that the flickering lights that splash across the world come from within our own animal-gifted minds, and always have. I really believe that my library material on codicils is true, and that Seth's statements about a safe universe are valid. Then I think, but both the library and Seth have their existence at another level of the psyche, a level at which the mirages are not so clear or vivid or convincing. To us, the dangers, fears, and terrors too often seem quite real. So Seth is just ahead of us enough in his travels that his assumptions for existence do work where he is. And now and then you or I get one foot there, or glimpse one small corner of that vaster reality. And for that moment the codicils work. We shout, "Eureka! It's a miracle!" And in that instant take a species leap more terrifying and significant and triumphant than the reptiles first crawling upon land. We sense a whole new field of existence. Only it doesn't last, and we're left with tantalizing images that propel us still further, roused by the memories of what we've so briefly seen. So it seems that we're betwixt and between, and often our fine animal alignment totters. We lose the fine security of instinct, and yet haven't learned to use these other faculties that still elude us. Maybe, crazy thought, the gods are spasmodic beings. Here and there through the ages, a man or woman reaches higher than most of us, climbs into a new realm of being, ascends to a peak of consciousness as yet transitory. And for that moment only he or she is a god, and shouts down what is heard or sensed or experienced. Then books are written about it, and translations and transcriptions. But it's all a kind of divine gibberish. We can't really translate it here any more than a dog suddenly comprehending mathematics could later translate the data to his dog fellows, no matter how inspired his barks. For the vision, however brilliant, fades. Yet the memory and knowledge of its existence remains a fact in our world. however clumsily expressed. Maybe whenever we pay attention to the lyrics instead of the song, we make our biggest error, if you'll forgive the new analogy. Maybe when we try our hardest to make the vision work in our world, to make it practical, we distort it most of all. Because what makes sense at those other levels of consciousness may sound nonsensical here. Yet those peaks of awareness may forge their own kind of reality and continuity at other levels of consciousness, each one acting like a mental footprint in an invisible world, so that paths are made for others of our kind to follow, paths visible there, but not here. Maybe our successes are chalked up at those other barely glimpsed levels, and for some still unknown reason they appear only in diluted form here. I'd hate to settle for that, though. I suspect that Seth's contention that we form our own reality automatically alters our subjective state the minute we accept it, and that we're suddenly confronted with challenges we were unaware of before, that we lose an old shallow innocence to gain a new innocent wisdom, because we accept the responsibility that earlier we assigned to fate or the gods. Certainly, some momentary confusion is understandable. So is Seth's voice a message from one level of consciousness to another, echoing through the symbolic molecules of some other kind of being that is different in Seth's time than it is in ours. Do his directions from his, quote, future, end quote, change the course of our present so that we turn a different corner of consciousness? And is the same thing true of any such messages? Do they lead us to a level of consciousness where the codicils do apply, where we use our beliefs to form reality as expertly as we now use bricks? Seth says that our beliefs cause our reality, whether we know it or not. But knowing it changes the game, adds an extra dimension, and one in which we're driven to find a safe universe so that our beliefs are no longer the results of fear. The trouble is that we still use old methods to implement the new ideas, some that are probably psychologically invisible to us at this stage and no longer suited to the matter at hand. We keep checking physical reality, for example, to see if such ideas are practical, because in the past we lived by accepting the evidence of our senses alone, and that was the sane way to operate. Now perhaps we have to do the opposite, alter our methods, and check our ideas and beliefs while ignoring the physical data for a while. This is something very difficult for us to do, yet the constant checking, I am getting the effect I want in whatever area only brings us back to where the mirage is the reality. Most likely, it's when we forget to check, when we grow weary and say, quote, "to hell with it," end quote, that things really happen. Consciousness is suddenly freed from effort, and the new beliefs click into focus, or we latch onto a new kind of instinct belonging to the hypothetically new species, where, presto, the thought does spring into instant reality. The difficulties are gone. We find or discover a better kind of manipulation that carries us over or above the level below. For all my work, I've barely touched upon those other dimensions. Little by little, my own prejudiced perception falls away in chunks. I only know that certain new experiences seem to be leading me further. I've had a series of extremely vivid waking dreaming events that involved probabilities, I've managed to enter another room in the library, and already have over 100 pages of what I call the world view of Paul Cézanne. The heroic personages seem to just be around the corner of my mind. So I suppose that these events will take shape in their own way. I haven't resumed regular classes and have no idea when or if I will. In the meantime, I see students at informal gatherings. Besides dictating his new book in our regular sessions, Seth usually speaks to my students at such times. His knowledge of our psychology is flawless. At a recent get-together, I was explaining the idea of the safe universe when Seth came through with humor and some kind of gentle irony to help me out. I'd like to close this book with excerpts from that spontaneous session. When Seth speaks to people directly, he takes their emotional states into consideration. He never speaks at them. In this particular instance, a student had just expressed a fear that love was smothering. Before I could answer, Seth came through, quote, "Now, you believe that love is smothering because you do not believe in a safe universe. And each of you, to some extent or another, believe that the universe is not safe, and therefore you must set up defenses against it." The one-line official consciousness with which you are familiar says, quote, "The world is not safe. I cannot trust it, nor can I trust the conditions of experience or the conditions of my own existence, nor can I trust myself. I can look at a squirrel and rejoice, but I cannot look at myself and rejoice, for I am filled with inequity, and I am, to some extent, evil." End quote. Seth spoke with rich irony here, looking from one person to another. Quote, "I am not only evil as myself," he continued in his example, but I come from a tainted and flawed race. My mother and my father were flawed before me, and I send these tragic flaws into the future. Therefore, I must set up my defenses in whatever way I can, to protect myself in a universe that I cannot trust, and from a self that is evil and flawed. Now, as long as you hold those beliefs, then you must indeed set up defenses. And it may seem to you, Seth nodded to the young man, that love is smothering. As long as you believe that you dwell in a universe that is a threat, you must defend yourself against it. As long as you believe that the self is flawed and that the race is doomed and evil, you must defend yourself against yourself. And how can you then trust the voice of the psyche? When I say to you, quote, be spontaneous, end quote, how dare you take that step? To be spontaneous would obviously give rise to all the lust, passion, murder, and hatred that to you is inherent in the human heart. So you say, quote, I try to be spontaneous, but how can I? I try to believe that I am good, but how can I be good when I come from a race that is evil, end quote. You try to say, quote, the universe is safe, end quote, and then you watch the news on television or read the newspaper and you say, quote, what lie is this? How can the universe be safe? When I read about the wholesale murder, war, trickery, and greed, how can I be myself? For if I am myself, will I not unleash into the world only more of the horror I see about me? For surely human nature cannot change, and human nature is evil. Look already what evil it has worked upon the planet. Then tell me, Seth, be spontaneous? What do you ask of me? And how can I stand upon the authority of the psyche or tell myself that I am good? The official line of consciousness forms a world about it, and you experience and perceive that world. While you devote yourselves to that official consciousness, the world will always appear the same, disastrous, bound for destruction, or the greater judgment of a fundamental God. My last book, The Nature of Personal Reality, is a good book. It is a helpful book, and it is far trickier than you realize. It will lead you automatically, if you use it well, out of the official line of consciousness. You will begin to question not only your private beliefs for your own purposes, but the nature of beliefs, and you will be led to discover other strands of consciousness. Rupert, Jane, is still working with what he calls the codicils, material he is getting from the library. Now those codicils are truths quite apparent at another stage of consciousness. The one-line state of consciousness was necessary, but it contained within it its own impetus for development. It set up challenges that could not be solved at that stage, and that would automatically lead to other kinds of awareness. Only when you sense these can old contradictions make sense. Quote, "You need not say the universe is safe," continued Seth. "You need not say, quote, the universe is safe, end quote, for at your present level that will only enrage you. Say instead, quote, I live in a safe universe, end quote, and so you shall. Those defenses you have set up will crumble, for they will not be needed. The codicils are practical. They are realities, but at the official level of consciousness they sound impossible. So you must learn here and now to alter the state of your consciousness and tune it to the state in which the codicils make sense. When people read The Nature of Personal Reality, the book, they will begin to examine their beliefs. They will think they are doing so to get rid of a problem or to gain an advantage, but they will soon find themselves involved in challenging the entire belief system that they know. When they do, they will automatically begin to alter the focus of their consciousness, and in so doing, begin to alter the nature of their world. Then, my dear friends, we will have our next book, quote, unknown, end quote, reality, the book, ready for them. It will confuse them further, and then we will come out with another book, The Nature of the Psyche, the book, that will help them find new footing in the world that they know. We will help them out of the confusion that we have caused, in other words. End Seth. We took a break. Then the student who was worried about love being smothering said that he had trouble relating to a girl who didn't subscribe wholeheartedly to Seth's ideas. Once again, Seth came through, this time jovially. Quote, "Now there are people who are quite involved with my ideas who do not know my name. There are people quite content with their lot, and they do not know my name. They know themselves. They are aware of the vitality of their beings, and they do not need me to tell them that they are important. The flowers and cats and trees don't need me to tell them that they are important either. And there are many people who do not need me for the same reason. These people recognize the vitality of their existences. They ignore the belief systems of their times. They are ancient children. They may not read philosophy, but they listen to the wind. They watch the behavior of the seasons. If you were satisfied with the nature of your existence, you would not be here. Those who are satisfied do not need my voice. They find sufficient reinforcement from the dawn and the twilight. They may build ditches or work in fields or factories. They do not need to listen to my voice because they listen to the voices of the oak trees and the birds, and to the voices of their own beings. I am a poor imitation of the voices of your own psyches to which you do not listen. I will be unneeded, and gladly so, when you realize that the vitality and reinforcement and joy are your own, and rise from the fountain of your own beings, when you realize that you do not need me for protection, for there is nothing you need to protect yourself against. End book. Unbelievable. Peace and becoming, light and love. Aloha. From Martin John, a.k.a. Reverend MJ. Thank you, Jane Roberts.